Before we start the show, Andy, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor, Wealth Simple, one of the leading online investment platforms globally. Now, Wealth Simple manages over £3 billion for more than 200,000 customers. Wealth Simple prides itself on providing access to smart, simple investing without the high fees and account minimums usually associated with traditional investment management. In fact, you can open a stocks and shares ISA, a SIP or a junior ISA with as little as £1, which is far lower than any of its peers, and every client has access to unlimited human advice from a qualified investment advisor. Now, Wealth Simple also provides ethical investing options and produces an online magazine in an attempt to demystify the world of money. Money to the Masses podcast listeners can get their first £10,000 with Wealth Simple managed free for a year if they sign up at wealthsimple.com/money to the masses. You can also check our full review of Wealth Simple online at moneytothemasses.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 268 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm good, Andy. I'm good. I'm like everybody else. I'm pondering when I'm going to get my next haircut and what I will look like by the time this all finishes, which is a bit unfortunate because obviously I do lots of video at the moment. So I'm slowly getting this, like my hair's getting more and more difficult to control, I think. So I was just reading, funny enough, on the FT, this is what kind of inspired my thinking that we're all, apparently according to Unilever, who've just released their results, lockdown is lowering our personal grooming standards. It's official because their results show that people are they're buying more cleaning products, but less grooming products. So we're going to have a world of more beards, less blondes. We're slowly all apparently turning into hippies, I think. So, I that's what I'm pondering anyway today. So on with the money stuff. But are you okay? Because obviously I'm not seeing you at the moment, Andy. You are benefiting. I'm envious of your ability to look the same, regardless of whether we are in lockdown or whether you've just got out of bed or anything like that with your particular chosen hairstyle.
Well, you say that. I mean, what you're essentially alluding to is the fact that I'm bald, and yes, I am, and that does make things easier. But in a way, it makes it trickier because whereas people who have got hair, they have to potentially think, "Oh, do I grow it out or do I get it cut?" It's kind of that either or. I've definitely still got to groom quite regularly to make sure that I keep this sort of Phil or Grant Mitchell look, because I'm kind of bald on top, but it gets all tufty around the side. So believe it or not, I do have to groom as much as any other man, and probably even more so that I don't look so ridiculous.
Yeah, see, I'm just envious. I've got lack of hair envy, as it were. I mean, there's loads of people online who've been shaving their hair off in a fit of, like, I think it's just a frenzy of going crazy in lockdown. But you get an insight into everybody's grooming habits, because if you follow people on social media long enough, they all start complaining, like I am effectively, about what they do and what they're going to do, shave their hair and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to all end up growing our hair longer, I think. But you obviously have to groom perhaps more regularly, but it looks good.
So that's enough of our grooming habits, Damien. Let's get on with the money stuff. That's what people are here for. What have we got coming up in this week's show?
Okay, this week's show, I'm quite excited by this week's show because it's a bit different. I'm going to talk about mindset there's two pieces that kind of have a bit of that in them. And I'm doing a lot of videos at the moment and a lot of work that's trying to encourage people to look at their finances while we're in lockdown and ways to improve their finances. And so I'm covering a lot of topics in those videos. If you want to see them, go and look at our Facebook, YouTube. I'm doing a lot of Facebook Live, which you can find obviously on Facebook. But if you go into our community, you'll find various clips and bits and pieces from it. And I'm doing one this Friday. I'm going to try and do them every Friday. And one of the things that has struck me is what I'm trying to do is help people feel better about money and taking control of it in this environment, because like anything in life, if you take control, then you feel better about it. It's better for your mental health and your well-being. And it follows on from that. One of the pieces I want to talk about is my view on the change of words, or the power of words in your finance, in actually enabling you or empowering you to achieve what you want. And it will all become clear when I actually go through the piece. After that, I'm going to do something on investing. And in particular, there's a typical 60-40 split, which is kind of the average medium risk type portfolio, 60% equity, 40% low risk assets like bonds, that has formed the core of modern sort of portfolio building and has been tested to extremes in the recent sell-off. And in fact, there's evidence to show that it's not working how it used to. And a part of that, I'll come on to why that isn't working as it were, but what you should do about it, because people who are buying investments 60-40, they would expect the bond portion to weather the storm and diversify their portfolio. So in the recent market sell-off, there have been a lot of people looking at their portfolios and wondering why they're down 20% or more when they thought they had a diversified portfolio. So I'm going to talk about that, the diversification, and a little bit more, again, touching on a bit of mindset about something that I think I want people to ponder and consider in this environment, particularly in a recession. And then the last piece is going to be you, Andy. You're going to do something that links to wealth, ways of making some money at home. And we've touched upon this before, I think, as a topic in the podcast quite some time ago, but we're bringing it up to date, particularly in this world where we are forced to try and make money from our sofa.
Brilliant stuff. And actually, before we move on to that, Damien, should we read out a couple of the reviews? We promise our listeners that we'll do this, and we get to the end of the podcast and sometimes we forget. I take responsibility for that. But we've had an influx of reviews, and I think we should read a couple out. And I'm going to put it here, Damien. I'm not going to wait for you to say it. I'm going to say it, that once we're out of this, I'm going to be absolutely desperate to be getting out some mugs for mug-worthy stuff. So I'm going to be sending out some mugs to anyone who leaves a review and claims it as theirs. Is that all right? I suppose I should check it with you.
You've done it now. No, I like that idea. We've had people leave some reviews and then write in and say, is that mug-worthy? And I've said, yes, it is mug-worthy. So for the period of time now, let's get people uplifted. Let's try and encourage more reviews. If you do write a review and you do want to claim it, write in, tell me, Damien@moneytothemasses.com, and then we'll organise something once we're out of this lockdown period.
Brilliant. So here's a selection of a couple of reviews that we've received recently. This is from Big T Climber. Excellent podcast. What a great podcast. Super informative, and it feels like you're part of the chat. Topics covered are relevant and wide-ranging on personal finance issues. Always great advice given in a friendly and informative way. We've also got one here from Caldo, Scotland. Very helpful information, always broken down to let everyone understand. It's UK specific too, which is great. So thanks ever so much for those. Oh, let's do one more. Ginger Dad, enjoy listening to the podcast and love the delivery style and useful information. Keep up the good work, guys. Excellent. So get your review in, pop onto iTunes or your pod provider of choice, pop a review on there. And if you don't think we'll get to see it, you could even do it the other way around. If you've popped your review on and you want to make sure that we've seen it, you can then email Damien with a screenshot of it and do it that way if you like. And then that way we'll definitely see it and almost certainly read it out. So, Damien, what piece are we going to start with on this week's pod?
Okay, the power of words. Now, this piece is, as I mentioned in the intro, about the importance of framing something you're trying to achieve in a different way. And it would increase your chances of being successful. And I'm going to just run through a bunch of these. These are my own opinions on how you change a word can have a massive impact about the way you do things. And in money, we have a lot of words that are used, particularly in sales, that are used deliberately to try and influence us. So let's start with the first one. I've got a real thing about the term credit card, and I think we should universally call them debt cards.
I absolutely agree.
Because the word credit has been used, if you look up the number of definitions for the word credit, they are overwhelmingly positive. So if you go back, you get given credit for doing something in terms of, you got given the credit for being really good at something or a great piece of writing. If you're given credit in the same way when you're allowed to borrow money, it's almost given a credit as a positive that you've been picked out as somebody who can afford to repay. And over time, the word credit has got all of these connotations that are overwhelmingly positive. So when people use credit and a credit card, it seems like something to aspire to, something that's they want to do. If you go back to the history of credit, there was a thing called the tallyman. I won't go into it. It was before my time, but my dad talks about it. And people who were borrowing money on the never, never, there'll be people who listen to this podcast who are older who will be chuckling to themselves hearing phrases like that. That were the phrases that were used sort of back in the 70s. And people would curtain twitch when the tallyman would go around and basically go and collect the money that was owed, as in they couldn't afford things. So rather than living within their means, it was obviously seen as a sign, a negative sign that people were having to borrow. They were in difficulty.
I remember hiding behind the sofa.
I think we've all got memories of that as a kid. Yeah, someone knocking at the door.
It was normally the milkman. We were getting ready for school and the milkman would knock and we'd have to hide behind the sofa.
And the word credit, I don't like it. So if you start viewing credit cards as debt cards, what it does is very quickly change your view of them. Rather than you want to buy something, I'm going to get out the debt card, I can't afford it. It reinforces that idea that you're in debt to somebody and going to have to pay it back. The word debt doesn't have any positive connotations that I can think of. So you being indebted to somebody means that you owe them. And I think if we started to use that more, I think people very quickly would start to try and avoid using them, or they certainly would think twice. So the power of a single word can have a massive difference on people's behavior. So the message there is, if you're going to use your credit card, think of it as your debt card. Credit card's great for cash flow, but do you really need to get debt? It means you can't afford it. The other one I think is budget. So we talk about budgeting. So we say to people, build a budgeting plan. And again, with budgeting, it very much has that idea like dieting. It's got a connotation that means that you're having to sacrifice, you're having to give up something. And that makes it more difficult for people to stick to a budgeting plan or even begin to create a budgeting plan. If instead of calling it a budget or budgeting plan, you called it a spending plan, the change of positions, you're again moving this time around, you're moving it from a negative word to something that's much more positive. That phrasing means that you're now looking at how you're going to spend your money. Everybody likes to spend, and now you're going to make a plan of how you're going to spend your money, not how you're going to not spend your money. Again, the power of a single word can change our mindset, and it's been shown it can increase your ability to be successful when you're trying to sort your finances. If you go on to retirement planning, now we will talk about retirement planning, and it's a very linear concept. So by that I mean that you're viewing your life as this straight line into the future, and at some point at the end of that line, you're going to get to retirement like everybody else, this sort of fabled place. But if you try and change that, and you might even not use the word retirement, I think the FIRE movement, the Financial Independence Retire Early movement, have got this right. They've changed the idea and looking at more about their financial independence. I think you could just replace the word retirement or pension with the word freedom. So your freedom plan, the point at which you're free from having to go to work, free from the burdens of having to pay down debt, you're actually able to do whatever you want because you've got to retirement. But the retirement part doesn't have to, because the thing with retirement, it obviously has that idea that it's way off in the future. Well, if you plan, then your freedom can be far sooner than the conventional thinking. And then going back slightly, I was talking about things being linear. When we talk about maybe a savings plan, or when you're trying to build something for the future, if you think of your life as cycles, so it's cyclical, that is cycles that are repeated, and you focus on, rather than this big end goal in the future, if you focus on your goal being in that cycle, you have a much higher degree of, or likelihood of, succeeding in achieving the ultimate goal if you just achieve it in the one you're in. So to give an example, rather than trying to save X amount of money by the time you retire, if your aim is to try and save some money in the current pay period and you achieve that, then you're more likely in the next pay period, so the next cycle of 1 month, you're much more likely to achieve that same goal of saving some money, or increasing the amount you save. So rather than fixating on this Everest that's in the future, you've got this much smaller molehill in front of you that you've got to just try and beat. And again, it's just reframing the same problem, but it seems much more positive. You start to gather momentum. On other areas of finance, I think if you look at fees and charges in investments, I think you should almost call them a tax, because we all hate tax. It's almost ingrained in us to not like paying tax, yet we seem to pay fees and charges that advisors charge or investment companies charge, yet without it sort of questioning it. So if you move that word and make it a tax, because it is a tax on your wealth ultimately, they take a set percentage every year, and that reduces your profits and ultimately what you're trying to achieve perhaps in terms of growth or your retirement fund in the future. So changing the word makes you view it as something that is perhaps optional or something to be mitigated, which people don't with fees and charges. They just look at it and go, oh, well, that's the charge they're going to charge me, or they won't try and negotiate or mitigate it in some way. The other ones I'm going to go through is, I think wage is another one, or earnings. And I think, again, you can flip that the other way around. I think you should change that wording more towards the word charge or your worth or your rate. So instead of thinking that your employer pays you this amount of money to do what you do, if you flip it around the other way, this is what you charge your employer to do what you do. So if you go to an interview and you ask for more money, you might get it, or you ask for a pay rise, you might get it. You have to realize that you ultimately get paid what you're worth, or what your employer thinks you're worth, but probably more importantly, what you think you're worth. So if you think you're worth more money, then you've got to prove it. You've got to actually prove that value. And in doing so, it encourages you to prove your value, prove your worth to a company, make yourself indispensable, and increases your chances of getting a pay rise. And we've all worked in companies where, I don't want to be unkind, but there's been an absolute idiot who is earning a fortune, who's incredibly successful, and you wonder why. And sometimes it's just because they've got the balls to ask for more and to push themselves and almost effectively charge themselves out at that rate, because they have that self-confidence, even if they don't have the ability. So those sorts of people do view it as much that the employer is probably lucky to have them, which the rest of us are probably sitting there thinking, how the hell did they get a job or being paid that much? So again, just reframing it. I think the idea of paying yourself first is a really good one. So rather than you thinking about you having to put money aside to save, then you want to pay yourself first. And that is a very good example. You'll hear other people talk about that idea. It's a very good example of where you've reframed the same thing to be much more positive. So you're putting yourself at the front of the queue. That is a good example of using a positive mindset and a change of words to increase your chances of paying yourself first, and therefore maybe investing in a pension. When you go shopping, I had this discussion with people, and my wife she'd be the first to admit it. She would talk about, I bought this and I saved X amount of money. Now, you don't want to use the word save, you want to use the word spend or pay, because I automatically say, well, how much did you pay? And it's because we're being taught about saving. You go into shops and you see 50% off and all these 2-for-1 deals or 3-for-2. And what they are, they're adverts. And again, when you see the word offer, discount, promotion, you should just think advert, advert, advert. The reason I say that is because when we watch telly, we fast forward the adverts because we get what they are. And so we don't dwell on them. Whereas when you go into a supermarket, we look at the framing of those offers and promotions and discounts in a slightly different way as a positive. And so we browse them and end up buying things we wouldn't normally want to buy. So again, it's about framing it. Oh, that's an advert. That's another advert. It takes a bit of training. It takes time. I mean, moving on to debt, I know people talk about clearing debt. And I think if you can try and frame that in a slightly different way, if you think about the end game of when you clear debt, if you have a lot of debt, what it will mean is you'll end up being sort of hundreds of pounds better off a month once you clear that debt. It's the equivalent of having a pay rise. It's the equivalent of having an increase in your net pay, or it's an equivalent of a new income stream almost, because you'll suddenly feel wealthier. So if you were to reframe that idea into a positive, for example, you were working on a pay rise, or you're building a future income stream, then what you do is you're just reframing that, and you're much more likely to sit there each month and go, have I managed to overpay even just a small amount towards my debt? Because if you haven't, then you can sit there and say, well, I've not done anything towards this increase in pay that I want, or the increase in net income that I have. And so by framing that, you're more likely to succeed and actually make a difference. So what I want people to do is, as part of an exercise, just look at some of the things they do and the things they fail at when it comes to money, and see if they can just reframe it slightly differently in a positive way. Make it aspirational rather than something that is a negative or a punishment, as like clearing debt, budgeting they feel like punishment. Try and reframe them into a positive way, and then just look for those words that are out there that you can use to change, and it will have a massive impact. Like I say, my favorite is the credit and debt card. And I think the budgeting and spending plan is a good one, but see if you can do it yourself. And if you have any ideas, then do send them in. We'll share them, because it's all about understanding yourself and your own motivations. And if you can do that, you're much more likely to succeed in life.
No, I think that's really good. I tell you what, talking about the supermarket and the adverts, I am the prime candidate for someone who looks at one of those buy one, get one frees, or buy two, get an extra one free. And I come out spending £30 more than I intended to, but feel like I'm a winner because I've saved so much money. And then I get home, my wife says, blimey, because she gets an alert on her phone that says how much I've spent. This is obviously when we used to be able to get out and about, this, not recently. And I'd say, yeah, but I've made a massive savings. She said, no, you haven't. You spent a fortune. So yeah, I could probably take a lot of that advice on. Right. So moving on to the next bit, we're talking about investing and 60-40.
Yeah. So from this was inspired by, a couple of pieces I've seen. There was one, again, in the FT that I was reading. It was just talking about the notion that the 60-40 split of a portfolio, which, as I mentioned earlier, is something that's at the core of a lot of portfolio planning, had faltered in the recent sell-off. And part of the reason it has done is with the wave of easy monetary policy, so QE, money printing, interest rate cuts, it's meant that we've seen markets become distorted. So bonds have rallied alongside equities. But of course, when we have these significant sell-offs, and they don't happen that regularly, it can mean that both assets just fall at the same time. And it will mean that investors panic. Now, Vanguard have a fund that's split 60-40, well-known passive investment. And it had its worst period in about 50 years in this quarter. It fell, I think, at its first drawdown of 20%. So it just shows you that funds like Vanguard's large strategy funds are very popular, but they too took a battering during this period, especially initially. And it raises the question as to what can investors do. Now, big institutions are scrabbling around trying to come up with ways to diversify their portfolios with some really esoteric things they're doing relating to volatility and stuff like that, which isn't available to DIY investors, armchair investors. And even if it was, it's incredibly expensive and in itself can go wrong. So what I wanted to do is just highlight to people the importance of diversification in terms of in a range of ways. So as I just said, active and passive, not one solution is going to work. Interestingly, active managers, so funds that have managers at the helm that claim that they can pick stocks or investments that do well, don't tend to prove that they can over the long term. And they often say that they're more expensive and their fees will be justified when you hit a downturn. And of course, in this downturn, this latest downturn, that's been proven to be false, as is often the case. So there is no simple answer as whether active or passive works best. It's often best to have a mixture. Some will work best in some environments. Not all passives are the same. Not all active funds are the same. Well, one of the things that you want to drill home is there's a range of assets you can invest in and a range of types of assets within each class. So in the recent sell-off, government bonds did well. So US treasuries did well, and in particular, the US dollar. So in terms of diversification, what that says is that within an asset class like bonds, some will do better than others. And so if you'd invested in UK gilts, for example, you would have done quite well in the recent sell-off, but they would have fallen during a part of the market wobble, just like the bond part of the 60-40 portfolios fell, but they recovered that bit quicker and they're a little bit more stable, given that they're backed by governments. So look at different assets within each class. Gold has done particularly well. Now, gold is an asset that is incredibly volatile in itself. I've talked about it on our Facebook Live videos at length in recent weeks, so go and have a look at those if you want to hear more. But typically, if you own between 5 and 10%, it can help diversify your portfolio and to a certain extent help reduce losses. Beyond that, you start to increase the chances of having losses, ironically, and the volatility, because gold is a volatile asset in itself. And so if you have a lot of it in your portfolio will become more volatile. During a recent sell-off, a lot of people didn't invest in overseas markets like China. And ironically, China did quite well. It seemed to rebound quicker from the coronavirus sell-off than other assets. So those managers who had no exposure to that region, which would be a lot. I'm talking about those that are global funds or maybe those that invest over in Asia. They would have lagged. So currency, as I mentioned on the dollar, that's another exposure you can get through maybe global bonds. Property funds. Now, property in itself is a diversifier. Property funds, unit trusts, are a little bit awkward because people have been locked into them. So in an environment like this, they're probably something to avoid. But you have retail investment trusts, they've not done particularly well, or they've not outperformed in the recent sell-off, but they do tend to do a little bit better in some recessions in the past. But this leads on to the idea of other assets and hard assets. So there'll be people who invest in things other than stocks and bonds. They may invest in property outside of all this stuff in the real world, so real assets. So they do have value in periods like this, because if you own something, physically own it, it still physically exists. Even if the market crashes, its value might diminish or it might fall slightly. And there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen to house prices. But if you view it as part of an overarching portfolio, or more importantly about you and your net worth, then it's taking diversification to the next level. So you can have a diversification of an investment portfolio, but as individuals, I think we should also look the next level up and look at our net worth and what impact, say, the recent sell-off or the current environment that we're in will have on that net worth. So that doesn't mean just investing in property or anything like that. That also means your own ability to earn money. So if you looked at your net worth, so if you were to sit there and write it down and how much you're worth, what you own, and your maybe a business you own, all these things, and you looked at what made your financial situation, taken in its entirety, then you could see a portfolio like a 60-40 portfolio take a hit during this period. But you could also find your net worth is going up because, for example, you may end up having a business that's performing quite well in this environment, or you have other assets that are doing particularly well, or you've just got a pay rise or whatever. So what I'm trying to do is get people to think about their net worth. So the investments are only part of what they do. And all the other stuff you do in the real world is also part of the grand total of your assets and your net worth. So it is possible that you can enter a recession and you can increase your net worth, even if your investments are falling, because they, in a way, can offset those investments. So if you look at everything that you own and what your business does versus what your investment portfolio does, in theory, there is an ability to perhaps diversify your net worth. So everybody, if there are people out there who just invest in property, and I know there's lots of people who swear by it, as soon as we get to the point that the housing market implodes, then they find themselves stuck and forced selling of their properties. The property market is littered with people who have done that in the past. You just don't hear about those stories. But of course, there are people who have success stories. There is the idea that a recession does present an opportunity. So this, again, is all feeding back into this idea of mindset and way you view the world. A recession can be a fantastic opportunity. It can be a very painful period. It can be a very uncomfortable period, but it can be a period of opportunity, because if you look at some of the biggest and most successful businesses that exist, many of them, or a number of them, have been launched during a recession or just after a recession. General Motors, Disney, Microsoft. So there are opportunities out there, because what happens is during a recession, the weakest or most vulnerable companies will probably implode. Some of the big players might implode, and it starts to thin the competition that exists out there for a business. And if a business survives, then there becomes opportunity. Advertising and marketing becomes cheaper. People who might not realize this, but if you were to try and advertise now, you would be able to advertise at an incredibly or far cheaper rate than you would otherwise normally. Now, okay, paid media that's out on the roadside isn't going to have many people looking at it at the moment because we're all in lockdown. But even online, the first thing that people ditch when their businesses get into trouble, and we're talking about big companies as well, they will ditch their marketing efforts. I mean, even Amazon has stopped paying affiliates, I read online the other day. So, and part of that is because they're swamped anyway. People are using Amazon. But you can see people start to pull in their marketing. Newspapers are coming under fire and actually following lots of their employees and journalists because they haven't got any advertising or much less advertising being put against their stories. People don't want their brands advertised next to the coronavirus stories. It's not good for their image. And we saw the culture secretary moaning about it the other day because of the pressure from the newspapers. And he was going to write to the top, I think, 100 brands in the UK and ask that they do start advertising alongside coronavirus stories, just to save the newspapers, which I found quite incredible. I don't see them doing that for any other industry. So what it means is that you can not only get your message out there easier or more easily because it's cheaper to, but there may be less competition. So it's again a change of mindset. There have been lots of people who have launched businesses off the back of recessions, or after they've been made redundant, they've been almost forced to start thinking about what else they're going to do. There are a lot of people at home who I know who have been furloughed, who are starting to do things online, make videos about cooking or make videos about things like makeup or whatever it is they like to do. And I'm trying to encourage them to continue doing that, because if you think about money to the masses, it came around largely by just following a passion and doing something, and then became the business that it is today. And the message is, use a change of mindset to help improve your finances in whatever you're trying to achieve during this period. But also, when you look at your own investments, look at the idea of how you could benefit in some way, could you, from this current environment, the opportunities that exist, but also a change of mindset. Maybe focus a bit more on your net wealth. So when your investments do fall, then it's in the context and put into perspective of your wider opportunity, because one of the best ways to make money is to invest in yourself. And it's a fact, whether it's taking a new course to learn a new skill, if you can invest in yourself, you're probably much more likely to make more money from it, because you could turn a couple of £1,000 degree into a career that can generate lots of money for you. But take that couple of £1,000 and invest it in the stock market, with the best will in the world, you're probably not going to turn that into anything substantial over time.
Good stuff. Actually, that leads us really nicely into the last piece, because you mentioned there about people who are unfortunately having to be furloughed during this awful crisis. But those people are finding other passions, and potentially it could end up being a future revenue stream for them, just like Money to the Masses turned out to be. And that's really what we wanted to talk about in the last piece of this podcast. A very quick piece where we're just going to go over a few ideas for those that are stuck at home potentially. Maybe they've got a bit of time on their hands and wanted to make an extra bit of money. So we've written an article on our site that goes through the top ways to make money while you're working from home. And I've pulled together a few others from some other articles out there. And so the first one I'm going to cover is actually very close to my heart, because it's something I've actually done. So one of the first suggestions here is to get paid to do voiceover work. I mean, effectively, we're on a podcast now. We've got the mics, we've got a laptop, we've got a voice. And if you're in the position where you've got some mics at home and a laptop, it doesn't take much equipment to get yourself up and running. You could even probably pop onto Amazon and get yourself a very basic mic for £20 or £30.
Sorry, Andy, I'm just silently chuckling to myself here, because when you said this is something that I've done myself, listeners who've been long-term listeners will know Andy has done a lot of different things, some crazy ideas, and just the range of things that could have possibly been, including the things I probably don't even know that you've done to try and earn money, just conjured up some incredible things. I probably could never have guessed it. So what were you voicing over?
Well, I did my own audio book for the book that I wrote. So I spent around about 2 weeks of my own time.
Andy, you could have just done this piece. You could have written this piece completely.
So I did my own audio book and I voiced it myself. There are websites out there that you can join and be a part of. Voice123.com, voices.com, Bodalgo.com, and my personal favourite is ACX. What are you laughing?
Sorry, Ed. I was just thinking that the idea that you were doing voiceover work, and I could just imagine if Bodalgo.com came up in your voiceover work. I was just pondering whether you would have got paid or not, but
no,
carry on. Yeah.
My personal favourite is ACX, which is linked to Amazon and through Audible, and that's where you can, as a narrator, you can actually pitch for certain. So the way that it works very, very quickly is people who want something recorded will put their job on there, and if you want to pitch for that job, you would put a brief audition, 30 seconds or a minute, and they'll probably get a few and they'll select. So you may be up against other people, you may have to pitch for a few before you get one, but if you've got a good voice and you've got a passion to do it and you're doing it in your spare time, then why not? Because you can earn up to sort of £100 to £150 an hour on some of the more lucrative contracts. So give that a go. It's a bit of an out there one, but if it's something you're passionate about, then why not give it a go?
I like Audible, actually, Andy. I just veering off topic slightly. In the last week, I've started using Audible. I did take a trial out previously, but I didn't really enjoy Audible when it came to listening to fiction, because I like to read fiction. I couldn't cope with the voice that the person was narrating the story with, but I've found that listening to non-fiction is brilliant on Audible, and I listened to it at twice speed. And I can't remember when we had a podcast meetup there was, who was it, Andy, who told us he listened to this podcast at twice speed, and I almost couldn't comprehend.
Yeah, it was Shane, wasn't it?
Shane, I talk fast enough. I thought at twice speed that would have been almost unbearable, but I've taken Shane's tip and I'm listening now to non-fiction books about a whole range of things. Productivity is my latest one I'm doing. I'm listening to that at twice speed, and it
ironic.
Yeah, I know. And he didn't even give that tip in it. I'm feel like writing to the guy and say, I'm listening to your whole productivity book at twice speed. But what it means is that it halves the time it takes me to read, in inverted commas, a book. I'm a big fan of it now, so I'm going to see how long this lasts. I've started using it and seeing if I can get through, because I always want to read more non-fiction stuff, particularly stuff that's going to help me in relation to what I do as a job. But I just don't have the time. So yeah, sorry, Andy, I gatecrashed it. That was just an idea for people if you like Audible. They give you free trials.
That's it, absolutely. You can get a free trial on Audible, and when you do that, you often get a free credit and you can just download a book. And actually, why not? While we're here, I have got a book on Audible and it is non-fiction.
Are you reading it, Andy?
Yeah, I read my own book out. Yeah, it is my voice. So if you want to hear my voice, it's about 2 hours long. It's called Minimize Me. Go and download it. You help your man out here.
Why not? Next tip, Andy. Come on.
Sell your skills on sites such as Upwork and Fiverr. So it's a similar theme about the voiceover work, but it's on a broad range of skills. So if you've got a certain skill in graphic design, social media, maybe editing, writing, anything like that you can do from home from a laptop, then pop yourself on those sites. So again, they are Upwork and Fiverr. And again, they work in two ways. You can either pitch for a job that's already been posted, or you can just post your skills and your rough price range and your skill set, what you like doing, and people could approach you for certain work. So that's really good. Again, if you've been furloughed, or if you've got extra time on your hands, or you've got time in the evenings on top of your day job and you want to earn extra money, get on there and advertise your skills, because they are really popular right now. There are lots of people who are looking for little jobs to be done, and it's a good way you can earn 50, 100, 200 pounds at a time. And a quick way to make a little bit of money. These aren't going to break the bank. They're not going to replace, your main income, but it's a good way for you to make a bit of extra income, maybe while you're watching the TV in the evenings, is to take part in focus groups or to complete surveys. Now, these do take a little bit of time to get used to doing. It's basically going online and answering questions in surveys, or focus groups are a little bit more intense. Sometimes you have to be on like a Zoom chat with people, and there'll be someone, it's like market research essentially. So there's two different ways that you can earn money there. The focus groups is more market research led, and so they pay slightly more. Completing surveys is more sort of solitary. You'll be sort of clicking buttons, and that will probably net you maybe 20 to 50 pounds a month if you're quite active on it. So we're not talking big amounts of money, but it's a time filler and a way that you can earn a bit of extra money. So there's a few ideas. We do have an article on the website, 11 easy ways to make money from home, and I'll pop a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, good. And one thing I'd like to add, you'll see a number of money blogger types and people promoting matched betting as a way of making money. And I'm really averse to it, and I know Andy is as well. And it works simply that you're using different offers from gambling companies to arbitrage. The idea is that you take different offers and you should be able to place a bet that means you guaranteed to make a profit, because you're almost betting against the opposite thing happening with another bookie, and you do it online and you'll make the money on the difference of the offers. Don't get sucked into that world, I'd say, because I think it's a slippery slope, especially when you start. It's a system that you have to stick to, and I just think it's encouraging people to gamble. And in this environment, it's one of the things that happens, unfortunately, in recessions. People start to gamble more because they're trying to find an easy way to make money. So all I'd say is don't go down that route if you can help it.
Yeah, as Damien said, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. It's something I tried for a while, and it just didn't work. You end up you do end up slipping into sort of actually gambling, which is the opposite of the whole idea of it. So just steer clear of it. If you're someone who's quite sort of organized and you've got a process and you want to do it, then do something like investing and use 80/20 Investor, where it's got a proven record and sort of a proper process, rather than gambling, because it's just not the way to go, especially as now with the coronavirus and things, everything's locked down. There's less and less offers out there, and bookies are probably somewhere you need to steer clear of.
The other thing you have to realize is that when you're in these betting sites that get hold of you, they try and encourage you to bet on other things. So they send you offers for roulette wheels and things like that, free spins and that sort of nonsense. So they start using clever marketing ploys that they've tested, they know work, to drag you off down the sort of dark side and slippery slope and trying to make you fall off into the sort of ditch or whatever. So yeah, do avoid it. And that is it for this week. As ever, you can contact me, Damien at moneytothemasses.com, Twitter, money to the masses with the number 2. Do look out for all the stuff we're doing on Facebook and Instagram. Join our Facebook group. I will be doing another Facebook Live this week, and also you'll see us, we're appearing all over the place. The Evening Standard got me doing some videos. I think I mentioned it last week. That video went out, and I'm now doing money questions for the Evening Standard on their videos, which is quite nice. So if you see any of that, do make sure you share it and tag us and leave us a review. I think that's it, Andy.
That's it. All that's left for me to say is until next time.
Until next time.